Hello and welcome to the Emma's for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abbie Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian, and this is actually going to be the very last episode of the Emma's for Mama podcast, season 2, in the year of our Lord 2024. Before we jump in, I want to highlight our podcast sponsor one more time. And if you are needing a last minute gift idea, Voetberg Music Academy has you covered with music lessons for sibling groups, for a friend. You can use the code MSForMama20 for 20% off each month that you're enrolled. And I love that it is a music learning approach that allows you to jump right in with song-based ear training instead of focusing primarily upfront on the more tedious aspects like theory, which are important, but a lot of times cause students to not want to practice. This program helps your student to be enthusiastic about practicing, and you're able to learn for as little as $30 a month in ukulele, fiddle, guitar, mandolin, and piano. So if you want to check out VoetbergMusicAcademy.com, be sure to use my code MSForMama20 and get that last person checked off your gift list. Okay, so it's the very last episode of 2024, like I mentioned, and we have not done a What Do You Want to Know Wednesday for this month. That's just the questions that get asked to me. I know you guys have been giving me great feedback on the episodes with my pastor Whit, but let's just kind of dive into some questions that you guys have been wondering about to finish out the year. And I will get these usually from my Instagram. You guys submit them. Sometimes I'll get them from email. So if you want to email me at abbie@msformama.net, I'll put that in the show notes. You can, if you have a question for me that you want to tackle. I typically do the personal What Do You Want to Know Wednesdays once a month. So this is what we're going to do today. The first question that I had, which I love, is what was your favorite thing about life with lots of littles and only small children? I was actually just thinking about this recently, that there's a very different dynamic as far as requirements on your time when you only have small children. And I've touched on this before when I've talked about the fact that you kind of have to adjust your expectations when you have a wide range of ages so that you have enough energy to give to your older kids. So you're not thinking, oh man, I made it to 7:30 or 8 o'clock, bedtime's done, it's all me time. Because once your kids are older, that's when they really start to come alive, is in that 8 to 11 range. And so having that expectation of being able to kind of stretch your energy and your focus to be on them during those later hours of the evening definitely develops as a need when your kids get older. When you only have younger kids, though, it can feel like a bit of a marathon to get to that 8 p.m. mark. But after that, everybody's asleep, assuming that you have good bedtime routines in place. And you can kind of just take a deep breath and hang out on the couch with your husband, or pick up a hobby, or read a book, or watch a show together. And that is something that I really encourage parents to take advantage of, to enjoy as much as possible. I know everybody has different situations and different circumstances, and somebody out there is like, that is not my reality. That's not how that works. My husband has a weird shift and comes home at that time, and I have to make a second dinner. And so, yes, I acknowledge that that won't always be the case for everyone, but it is a pretty typical perk, I would say, of having only small children. I kind of, to piggyback off of that, I was just thinking about the fact that one of my typical practices during the Christmas season was to put my kids down for naps and do quiet time so that there wasn't anybody running around the house, put on a Christmas movie, wrap gifts, do a Christmas craft. And that was a way that I recharged. And I really looked forward to those sessions of just me and the Scotch tape and a Christmas movie. I really can't do that anymore. There's always somebody awake. I'm not going to tell my older kids, my 18 and 17-year-olds to go do quiet time. Now, I could say, I need to go to my room and wrap presents, and people would understand, but it's just a different dynamic. And so I realized that I'm saying the things that I loved about not having small children around, but I'm just saying there are perks to having that schedule where there's everybody doing nap time or everybody going to bed at a certain time. You kind of have set aside time to yourself that you think you don't have, because there's that concept that, moms of young children never get a break. But it actually becomes more true in some ways, but in good ways, when you have the wider range of ages or the older kids. You get breaks in other ways, but the evening time and the nap times are not necessarily part of it. Another aspect that I really enjoyed with all small children is that you do everything together. As your kids get older, they start having different schedules. Maybe they need to go to work, or they have a basketball game in another town that you're not able to attend. Some kids need to go down for naps, and other kids need to go to a recital, and other kids are doing something with friends, and it's all good things, but it's more fractured. And so that really kind of sweet time of everybody being together and that family unit being really close and snug is something that I miss in a lot of ways. And I did cherish that and did recognize that that would be a pretty short season, even while I was in it. It's so easy to look back and to have those little old ladies at the grocery store say, you know, you're going to miss this one day. And you think, I don't know. This is pretty stressful. I don't know how much I'm going to miss my child melting down in the, produce aisle. But there are aspects that you can recognize in the midst of them that the Lord gives you kind of some appreciation for, like, I'm going to miss this one day. This is really sweet. Everything is gelling today. Everything is working. It's not complicated. We don't have to mesh schedules, which is one of the reasons why we choose not to do a lot of extracurriculars and to keep the focus on dinner together as a family pretty much every night when our children are young. It's not that they never do any sports or any activities, but we keep them pretty minimal because we know that day is coming when they have driver's licenses or they have more varied interests, and we're not going to be able to keep it as simple and sweet and together as it is now. So I'm going to be that little old lady, even though I'm not a little old lady yet, and tell you that even though the days are long, the years really are short. I know, such a cliche. And that this time of sweet togetherness where you guys have similar schedules and you can all go see Christmas lights together and nobody's missing are really just fantastic. And I hope you'll enjoy them as much as you can. The next question that I had came from a mama who wants to know how old I was when I had each of my children. I'm going to have to think about this for a minute. I was 23 years old when I had my firstborn, Ezra. And then I had Simon 18 months and 3 days later. So I was 25 when I had him. And then I was 28 when I had Della, our third born. And then I was, I think, about 12 days shy of being 30 years old when I had Evie and Nola, our first set of twins. I was 32 when I had Theo, 34 when I had Honor, 36 when I had Shiloh, and 37 when I had Titus and Toby. So my closest two sets of kids are Ezra and Simon at 18 months and 3 days, and the twin bees and Shiloh right at 19 months, if I remember correctly. So there you go. I hadn't thought about all of that, but that's a lot of kids in a short amount of time. So 10 kids in 14 years. This next question is about what to think and pray through if your homeschool kid really wants to go to school. I'm always encouraging people to know what their why is for homeschooling. So if your why is primarily curriculum or education based, it may be that your child can get exactly what he needs somewhere else other than in your home. It probably is true that your child can get, an education that you will be happy with somewhere else other than your home. And that could be a consideration. If the goal is a particular type of socialization, which I think probably a lot of people will find funny because they assume the kind of old school association with homeschooling is that you stay home and you never see anybody. I think that's changing. We even have a shirt in my shop, Paint and Prose. I'll put the link in the show notes that says over socialized homeschooler on it, because the reality is that many homeschoolers, because of a maybe truncated school day, as far as the academics aspect, are enrolled in all kinds of things. We have personally done everything from robotics to ballet to choir to sports to horseback riding lessons to singing lessons to quite a few things I'm sure I'm forgetting. And I was homeschooled and I grew up the same way. I had a lot of opportunities to do a lot of varied activities and never felt like I was lacking in either socialization or chances to pursue different areas of interest. So if there is a particular thing that your child can't access due to homeschooling limitations in your particular area, And that's why they want to go to a traditional school. If you would prefer that they stay homeschooled, my suggestion would be to think and pray about how to accommodate those desires they have for outlets if they don't have them already. And because a lot of times, if we're creative as parents and we're willing to put in some effort to research and to find avenues to let our kids pursue their passions, that's kind of scratches the itch to go to a traditional school. Quite likely, your reasons for homeschooling are less to do with specific educational goals. I'm not saying those aren't part of it, but often have more to do with fundamental ideological issues. You are wanting to give them a firm foundation in morality. I just saw a really snarky Instagram reel the other day where someone was saying, like, my response to all of these homeschool moms that assume that I'm wanting to bring my kid home and indoctrinate them with conservative Christian values. And it was quoting some really crass, profane lyrics of some sort of rap song that basically said, no way. I won't fill in any of the blanks of what kind of no way. It said, because this mom chose to homeschool for other reasons. And she was a secular mom, and she was making sure that people knew that there were other reasons that people choose to homeschool. Now, obviously, my main audience of moms, specifically homeschool moms, is going to be oriented toward biblical Christianity. Not all of you, but most of you, I would say. And I would say that that ideological bent is going to inform your desire to be the primary touch point for your children's faith-based education, their primary touch point for your children's view of history, of critical thinking skills, of morality, of their biblical education, all of these things that are important to parents who choose to homeschool for that reason. If those are your reasons, then sending them to a traditional school quite likely won't accomplish those reasons unless they share all of your same values and convey it in the way that you want it conveyed. Another really common why for homeschooling is time together as a family. And that would be one that would be a deal breaker if your goal is to have more time together as a family, or freedom to travel. Enrolling your kid in a traditional school schedule obviously would majorly interfere with that goal. So my suggestion to you would be, one, to consider that a lot of times a student's desire to change schooling, while legitimate, to consider has its basis often in something fairly temporary. They're struggling with loneliness. They're struggling with a particular subject. They're struggling with wanting to do a particular activity they don't have access to. And pretty often we can brainstorm and pray about a particular solution to those problems if we would like to continue homeschooling. So meeting that need is what I would suggest that the focus be, rather than a knee-jerk reaction of either absolutely no, this is what we said we were going to do, get over it, or flipping to, oh no, they don't want to do this anymore. I need to go ahead and enroll them immediately in a different school. We need to just completely change, even though we have these strongly held reasons for doing what we do. So pray about ways to meet those needs, and then pray about whether the Lord is wanting you to stand firm in something that may make you unpopular with your kiddo. It could be that they do need a change of scenery. It could be that they do need a different learning environment. I actually was homeschooled until age 11. And then for 2 years, I was in a teeny tiny little private school where my mom taught almost all of my classes, just out of necessity, because they couldn't afford to hire a bunch of different teachers. So she was my math teacher and my English teacher, my Bible teacher and my history teacher. And, but I was with other students in a school building in a more traditional school setting with a more traditional school schedule. And then she actually did a little co-op of about 12 to 15 kids for a couple of years. And that was my high school experience. And then I went to college at 15 with several of my other homeschooled friends, because my mom basically said, you can do your last 2 years of high school and then repeat it in college with a lot of the introductory freshman basics, or you can just dive right in as long as you get a good enough score on the entry exam for this college. And so I was like, let's do that option. Let's not repeat it. And dual credit with college was not as big of a deal as it is these days. And so I chose that option. I started college really early. So I didn't have a quote unquote traditional homeschooling experience. I kind of had different influences and different locations and sometimes different teachers. And it absolutely worked for me. So I am not hardcore in any way homeschool from kindergarten to, 12th grade graduation. I just think that we need to be careful that we're making decisions based on prayerful discernment and knowing our whys rather than making decisions based in fear, either direction, either fear of the world or fear of our kids' disapproval, or because we're getting pressure elsewhere saying they're not going to thrive in a homeschool environment when we know for a fact that they are indeed thriving. They're just getting, a lot of times kids get pressure from peers. And we've experienced this personally in our family saying like homeschool's not cool enough. Why don't you do something different? And then down the road, when we've persevered through it, they have been really grateful to have had more freedom to pursue other interests throughout the day and to be able to travel and to do all those things that are part of our why personally as a homeschooling family. So hopefully that helps you to take some of those factors into consideration as you pray about what to do going forward. The next question is about video games. Someone asked if our kids had ever expressed interest in video games, and I had to giggle a little bit because at least part of this podcast was filmed while my oldest son, who is 18, was playing Stick Fight, which is a video game, with my middle sons, who are 9, 7, and 5. My 5-year-old only gets 15 minutes, like once a week. And so we definitely have some video games going on in our family. I have fond memories of playing Mario Kart with my brother every now and then. I was not a big video game girl at all, but I did like me some Mario Kart and some Super Mario Brothers. And my kids do the same. Now, our parameters are that we cannot have any screens in our house on a weekday before 3 p.m. and that all school and chores need to be done. The living room needs to be picked up. Things need to be in order if we're going to have any screen time. And then my kids actually, quote unquote, pay for their screen time with our penny reward system, which I'll link in the show notes. So if they don't have pennies, they don't play. And there are many days that go by that they do not play any video games. So this is not like 3 p.m. hits every single day and they're playing video games. It's probably like 2, maybe 3 times a week. My older boys do have some other games that they'll play on stay up night with their dad and their grandpa, actually. That's interactive computer games online that they can all see each other playing. I don't even know what they are. This is their thing, not mine. So we are not a video game free family, but we are also not a video game all the time family by any stretch. So I am not the right one to ask if you're looking for video game purism, or for video game suggestions other than Stick Fight and Mario Kart and Super Mario Brothers. Those are fun. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, here's another question. Child-proof a home or home-proof a child? We are much bigger on the home-proofing the child aspect, but I will say that just like with any philosophy, your mileage will vary depending on the personality of the child. So our twin bees, for example, are incorrigibly destructive. They absolutely do not care. If the door is closed and they don't have direct eyes on them, so let's say during bedtime, they cannot be bothered to care about the things that they knock over, crash down, mess up. So in that case, and this is after a lot of communication, this is after a lot of consequences, a lot of feedback, a lot of consistently held standards and expectations and boundaries. And it's just like they lose their minds when they're together. And I know that will improve and they will grow out of that. And it is improving. But for now, for their room, it's very minimal. There's 2 beds in there and a dresser. And that's about it, because anything else is a temptation to mischief for those 2 little boys. I have other kids that never really tried to break anything or get under the kitchen sink into, cleaning supplies or anything like that. And there was no need to baby proof anything because they just weren't going to mess with it. They were just chill. And then I've had the in between where you teach the lesson, they understand it, they might cross a boundary, and you make sure that they understand that that's not okay and show them what they should be doing again, make sure they understand, and they do fine going forward. That said, I'm not going to have a lot of low down, really easily breakable things, but I'm also not going to save nicer things or pretty things that I would like to put out for a someday that may never come. For example, I hear from people that are like, how in the world do you have anything like a glass lamp that's sitting on my buffet? Oh, my kids would break that in a heartbeat. It's not that it can't get broken. Things get broken regularly in our house. We actually switched recently from any kind of plastic drinkware to all glass and like mason jars and things like that. And we break them on the regular. I don't love it, but it's a part of life with 12 people living in the house and quite a few of them being really small and prone to breaking things. But it's not necessarily because of wild behavior. So we're often encouraging them to consider their environment, to consider where they are, to consider their speed or their twirling around. It's not that we don't have fun inside, but sometimes it's just reaches a point where you're like, listen, if you're going to do this, you need to go outside. So I think what I've tried to do is find a balance between things that you can live with that are still pleasant to look at, that are also functional in the main areas of our house. And then maybe some things like glass lamps in corners where kids really aren't even supposed to be. So if I see them in that corner, I'll say, hey, come away from there. You don't need to do that. And this particular lamp that I'm referencing is fine. It hasn't been knocked over. It hasn't been broken, even though it could have been by kids. And I'm not going to say one day I might be able to have a glass lamp in my house. Right now, that's not possible because I have children. I'm going to say the glass lamp might be broken, but I'm going to teach them principles to follow. And if it happens, it happens. We can clean it up. You know, it's always a possibility. But I think despite the fact that things regularly get broken in our house, like the mason jars, the vast majority of the time, the stuff that I put out stays okay. And, it's just kind of they get used to it being there. It doesn't have any novelty to them. They don't need to touch it. And so, or pick at it or feel like that cabinet is locked. So I'm going to go make sure that I mess with it. You know, it has almost this mystical draw. And so they just kind of live life around the things that we have, and they understand the things that are off limits, and they understand their consequences if they don't respect those things. Now, obviously, if I had a cabinet that was full of toxic things, that's one of the reasons why I choose not to have toxic chemicals that I clean with, is because I don't want my kids to get into something accidentally, or if I'm not looking, or if they're having a moment of not obeying or not thinking before they act, that results in poison control. So that's another consideration, is if you have fewer things chemically that are off limits, then there's less chance that when you don't lock the cabinet, that there's going to be a big time problem. So if there were a cabinet full of chemicals, that would be one that we would for sure make sure they couldn't get into. Okay, this is just a fun one. Someone asked how our puppy was doing. I told the story here on the podcast about our puppy Winnie pretty much dying after she accidentally got stepped on by one of our daughters and had a lung contusion and was not breathing and eyes rolling back in the head and going stiff and just completely expiring in our arms. And then my husband, Sean, actually gave her mouth to mouth, revived her, and she survived after several days at the vet and way too much money to keep her at that vet. She is doing fantastic. She does not seem to have any adverse effects from the accident. We put a little cat bell around her neck so we can hear her jingling everywhere she goes, so we don't step on her again. She has grown a lot. So I mean, at this point, I don't think that she would have the same reaction if she got stepped on, unless it was by a giant with, hobnail boots. But she's doing great. She is a joy. She's so fun. She's a really funny personality. My husband said she's kind of like a cat dog. She's very friendly when she wants to be, and she'll curl up and kind of rub herself all over you and lick your face. And then she's done when she's done, and she runs off. She doesn't really come a ton. He's like, she doesn't know her name, and she decides when she wants to be your friend and when she doesn't. So that's maybe a little bit of a harsh reading, but because she's mostly just really fun. She runs up to you and flips over and wants you to rub her belly every single time she sees you. Now, she does have 3 members of our family that she is not impressed with at all and will growl at whenever they get near her, and is her way of warning them away. And that is our 3 youngest members of our family, because they're a little rough with her, and she lets them know about it. She says, nope, don't come near me. So But yeah, overall, her health is great. She is really fun and such an energetic addition to our family, and fuzzy and cute and sweet and friendly for the most part. Like I said, depends on the day, but for the most part. And then it's fun to watch Ruby, who is our 6-year-old beagle, just get a second wind. She has been running around like she's a puppy, and they just trample all over everything and chase each other and jump on each other. And it's fun to watch her enjoy life with her second wind named Winnie. Okay, so the next question is one that I get from my readers all the time, so much so that I did a whole podcast on it. So I'll give you a truncated version. I'll give you the synopsis here, but I will also link I don't remember the number. I think it may be 15 or somewhere. Maybe it's 12. I don't remember. I'll have Ezra link the podcast so that you can listen to the whole thing. But the question is about siblings, how to help them get along so that they're not name calling and fighting all of the time. My top suggestions are: 1, spend a lot of time together. When your kids are constantly going different directions, they don't form close bonds to the people at home. Instead, they form those bonds with people outside the home, and they kind of give the best of their energy and their good moods to other people. And that means that when those other people leave, because quite likely the people that they're giving their best moods and energy to are temporary friends, they might go all the way through school with them, or they might play a bunch of sports with them. But most of the time, our best friends are not those that we meet in kindergarten and then have when we're 40 years old. Whereas I like to emphasize to my kids that their siblings are built-in best friends that they can have for life, that they're going to actually be seeing each Christmas, that they're going to trade babysitting with, that they're going to go on trips with, and just encourage that long-term mindset. So the time spent together, encouraging a long-term mindset. I realize that some people's schedules aren't allowing. Homeschooling allows for that more, but if you're not homeschooling, you may be like, how does that happen? I would encourage you not to overschedule extracurriculars on top of a traditional school schedule, because that automatically means that very little time is being spent with the family and with siblings together, having that opportunity of just being bored together, to bond, of making forts and running around outside and, picking dewberries in the summer. And so many of my memories I have one sibling, with my older brother, especially as children, we're just doing really mundane things like digging for crawdads in the creek outside. And that gift of time, as much as you're able to give it to them, to allow those bonds to forge through just ordinary pursuits, is so, so important. Another thing would be to make name calling off limits. It shouldn't be an option for your kids to be rude to each other, for my kids to be rude to each other. It doesn't mean that it never happens, but saying that something is an option means that you don't overlook it, that you don't say, this is just how it is. Siblings just do this. It's, I've watched all those TV shows. All those siblings treat each other badly. And that dovetails into another suggestion, which is don't watch those TV shows. There are lots of movies and TV shows. Home Alone comes to mind for an example that's kind of relevant to this season we're in, where all of the siblings treat each other absolutely horribly. They call each other crude names. They act like everybody that's related to them is a waste of space. The older kids look down on the younger kids. And there's this assumption, if there's an age gap, of course the older kids are going to be annoyed by the younger kids, and the younger kids are going to think that the older kids are jerks. I have not found this to be the case, or to need to be the case in every scenario in our home at all, or in other people's homes where I really admire their family dynamic. And I think part of it is that the assumption is that you have goodwill towards your family, and that is what is encouraged. That's the standard that's set, and you're able to shut down ugly speech and snarky attitudes and condescending views of other people, like right when they start. I have a lot of people that say, like, so do you intervene in every single disagreement? No, I definitely don't. But I also use discernment. When I see that this is a petty argument that's immediately going to veer into kind of, if you've ever seen Emperor's New Groove, this is actually pretty good natured in this scene in Emperor's New Groove, but the two kids go, and they're arguing back and forth. It's not accomplishing anything. Now, at the end of it, they say, night, mom, and then we'll go right back to bickering. One is saying, the other one is saying, nuh-uh, but it's very difficult to replicate without having two people doing it. Like when you see that this is not going to be something that they're working through, that's a necessary conflict managing skill, but instead it's just a bickering fight, I am very quick to say, no, we're not doing this. You guys can find a solution, but we're not going to speak unkindly to each other. We're definitely not calling names. We're not cutting each other down for the sake of making ourselves feel bigger. It goes right back to Philippians 2:4. Consider 2, 3, and 4. Consider others' needs as more important than your own. And with humility, think of others as more important than yourselves. That is not our natural bent as human beings. And it certainly is something that we have to learn and have modeled for us and have developed in us over time by the grace of God's Holy Spirit, as opposed to just be able to instantly flip a switch. And there are going to be kids that are more prone to look out for themselves first than other kids. And those kids that are more prone to look out for themselves first are going to have some things that they struggle with more and some things that they struggle with less, just like the kids that are kind of more prone to be more generous hearted and to be peacemakers will have other things that they struggle with. So I'm not simply saying some kids are worse than others. I am saying that when you notice that you have a kid that struggles to be kind to his siblings, that's not something that you write off, that you address it, that you give them opportunities to practice, that you bring in appropriate discipline if necessary, that you make this an area of focus and importance in your family so that your kids understand, regardless of how well they respond to your methods, that this matters. And you plant those seeds of kindness, you plant those seeds of consistency, you plant those seeds of togetherness, you plant those seeds of uplifting, encouraging speech, of selflessness, and you keep watering them and you keep praying and you keep coming back to the basics and being consistent even when it doesn't feel like you see fruit, because the Lord's the one that brings the harvest, but it doesn't come on its own without our being willing to work really hard for it and to encourage our kids to do the same. All right, so the next question is how to correct a child who thinks he knows better. This is an example of a 7-year-old. So we are in an era where it is very common, popular, trendy, whatever the right word is, to reject everything about the way we were parented. And so even any whiff of the idea that, like, because I said so is very frowned upon. So I will say that because I said so is not like a phrase that I suggest or highly recommend or anything. But there is an element of innate authority and life experience and just gravitas that an adult will have that a kid cannot have, because he hasn't had as much opportunity to learn, to grow, to mature, to experience things. And so my pushback against a child that's 7 or 5 or 11 or even 17, it might be worded differently. There might be a slightly different approach, but it's going to be similar. It's going to be to say, I appreciate that you feel like you've got this figured out. However, I am going to ask that you consider what I am telling you first before you go off your own way. And that is because I have been in this situation many times before, and I have found that the way you're wanting to do this doesn't work for these reasons. If you want to give 3 reasons, great. If you want to give 1 reason, great. If you want to do a really short version of this without a lot of explanation, I fully support that. But essentially what you're telling your child is, God made me the authority in your life. What you're doing right now is fill in the blank. Unsafe, foolish, unproductive, whatever the objection is. And I know because I've been there. And we're going to do it this way because experience and practice has proven this to work. So for example, if I see a kid, let me give you just a silly example. Maybe not so silly. Maybe this will save somebody's hand. So we had a teacher at our homeschool co-op once who cut the tendons in between her thumb and her forefinger with a butter knife because she was using a butter knife to cut chicken. So the other day, one of my kids was using a butter knife to cut something. And when I said, hey, be careful with that, don't use it, they immediately came back with, not necessarily rudely, but they were like, it's just a butter knife. It's not sharp. And I said, yes, but sometimes that actually makes it worse because you apply more force when you have something that is a blunter object than something that's sharp. And so if that slips, you're going to be pushing on it way harder than you would be if it were a sharp knife. Now, obviously, I have suggestions for them when they're using sharp knives, if they're old enough to do that as well. But you're pushing on that way harder than you think you are. And if that slips, it's still, a metal object that's sharp enough to go into your hand. And I gave them the example of this teacher who had caused so much damage to her tendons that she ended up having surgery and her hand was in a cast for months. And it was a really big deal. Does your 7-year-old, who is insisting that he's, quote, going to be fine because he's using this butter knife that isn't even sharp, mom, duh, hopefully he's not talking to you like that. That would be kind of another thing is how is the things he knows better being expressed? Because we want to teach our kids to express themselves with kindness and civility and consideration to others. And that includes their parents. Of course, the Bible tells us to honor our parents. The Bible tells us to respect and give reverence to those who are older and have more life experience. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily just say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, to every stranger who happens to be 20 years older than you are by any stretch. But there is a consideration for the life experience and the wisdom gained. And so if my child is kind of snarkily telling me off because, duh, it's not too sharp, I'm fine, then you can calmly say, it is in fact dangerous what you're doing. I do know this to be a fact. Here's an example of it. Now, please do not do this anymore. In fact, give me the knife. If they look like they're going to go right back to what they were doing, I would just take the implement away. That's a very specific example. But it's our job to keep our kids safe. It's our job to be the kind and considerate authority in their lives. It's our job to help them to learn to communicate with civility. It's our job to help them understand what boundaries look like. So that would be my suggestion to you, would be to assert the authority of experience, to give them an instance of why that experience is valuable, and then to just hold the boundary. Okay, so this next question makes me laugh because of a particular story that I'll share with you. It says, how do you deal with your kids learning curse words? So one time at the gym, many years ago, at this gym that I taught at, my kids were in the childcare, literally on the other side of the wall from the room that I taught in. And I went to pick them up, and one of the helpers there came and said, we had an incident with Simon today. I think Simon was 7 at the time. And there was another boy that was about the same age. And they said, so this boy called someone a name. And I'm not a cursor, but I will say the word here because you guys know I'm not actually using it. So the boy had called someone else a dumbass. And Simon had tackled him with his hand over his mouth. Like, talk about like fervency for, the truth or something. I don't know. It just cracked me up. I was like, Simon, it's okay. Even if someone says something they shouldn't say, we don't need to tackle them and put our hands over their mouths. That was a little much. Nor had he ever been taught to do such a thing. It's one of those things where you're like, I need to maintain a stern face and make a point, but I'm laughing so hard on the inside. And one of the reasons I was laughing was because it was such an overreaction that it was kind of funny. The boy was fine. He wasn't hurt. They were just letting me know what had happened. And then the other reason was that I knew for a fact that Simon didn't know what the second half of that word was. Because I questioned them. I was like, do you know this word? Like, what did he say? And what he said was, Mom, he called him dumb. So he had not even reacted to the second word. He had reacted to the first word, which was so pure and innocent, but also aggressive that it really cracked me up. And I will always remember that particular incident. Now, my 17-year-old is not, that's what Simon is now, he's 17, is not nearly so pure and innocent now. He learned quite a few curse words on his homeschool co-op football team. That's not funny. I'm not truly laughing. I just find it amusing that we as parents can feel like we know where the quote unquote threats are coming from, and they might come from places we don't even expect. So I think the number one thing that I would encourage you is to not freak out. Don't do what Simon did. Don't tackle them and cover their mouths as you knock them to the floor. You can just explain to them in whatever age appropriate way is necessary, depending on how old they are, that there are words in our world that are not intended for good. They're intended for shock value. They're intended to be crass. Like I said, that word may not be appropriate for a 4-year-old. They don't know what that means. They're intended to evoke a response or to let out anger or to insult someone. And the Bible tells us really clearly in Ephesians 4:29, this is the ESV version, and it says, "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear." Obviously, using curse words doesn't give grace to those who hear. It doesn't build people up, and it can corrupt us. It can introduce filthy concepts to our minds. It can give us words to insult people that we didn't have before. It can give us ungodly ways of expressing our anger. And so there's no need to panic if your child repeats an ugly word, either innocently not realizing what it is, which my kids have absolutely done, or on purpose, which my kids have not done in my presence. But I know for sure that they have used ungodly words at times. I remember very distinctly saying an ungodly word, a curse word, when I was probably 8 years old. And my personality, I don't curse as an adult. That's not a habit of mine. And I remember as a kid being really, really upset about something. And that was the way I could be the quote unquote baddest in that moment. And I remember one of my homeschool friends saying, "I heard that." And the pang of fear that shot through my heart that she was going to tell on me. But of course, that was warranted because I had no business saying what I just said. So it's not the end of the world, but also I think it does matter. Our words have power, our words have weight, our words have worth. And so we need to convey that to our kids without conveying to them that if certain words come up, it's kind of the end of the world. Find that balance between encouraging wholesome speech and yet recognizing that they're going to encounter unwholesome speech, and it shouldn't make them want to hide under the bed. Okay, we're going to finish up with one more. It's super lightweight, but fun. Someone wanted to know my favorite childhood meal. Well, I'm going to give you some hope for your future if you have picky kids by saying that I was a picky kid who liked, I liked good for me food. I also liked bad for me food, but I didn't have a wide array of interests, and I will now eat most things. There are certain things I'm still not a huge fan of, but I love all different types of food that I would not have wanted to have anything to do with. As a side note, and slightly less lighthearted, I did have people ask me about picky eaters and what to do. And just a very quick tip is to encourage thankful bites. I can remember very specific things that I do not currently serve my kids, like beets with honey. Still brings up a little bit of uncomfortable churning in my stomach to think about that. Like salmon patties, was not a fan of those. Turnips, not a fan of turnips, that I ate growing up in very small quantities, knowing that my mom required me to. I didn't like them. Sometimes I held my nose and chewed as fast as I could go, and she didn't mind. She was just requiring me to take thankful bites. Thankful bites are just I didn't have to make this food. It's nutrition that you placed in front of me. I'm going to make an effort. And so that's what we require of our kids. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to finish off every last thing that you really hate. So back to what I actually loved. I was a very simple girl. My mom made bacon and tomato sandwiches. No lettuce. Thank you very much. Bacon and tomato sandwiches, which was my first introduction to mayo that I actually enjoyed because I thought I hated mayonnaise. So she put a little bit of mayonnaise, and then turkey bacon. We didn't eat pig bacon growing up, and a nice thick juicy tomato. And I loved bacon and tomato sandwiches. I actually loved tomato sandwiches. Apparently I'm a tomato girl. I am. I've always loved tomatoes. And a lot of kids that don't love tomatoes when they're really small, but I did, or at least as long back as I can remember. And I still do. And I would eat like big, thick slabs of tomato slices with salt and mayonnaise on bread. So, that sounds nutritious, doesn't it? Beef tacos. I was a huge fan of crispy tacos with beef, lettuce, tomatoes, cheese, like as basic as you could possibly get, but as many restaurants as we could go to, I would order those. I was a huge fan of tacos, which is funny because if I go to a Mexican restaurant now, I never order tacos. I always order something more adventurous. In fact, I'm typically looking for the least typically Tex-Mex item on the menu if I go to a Mexican restaurant now. So I have evolved. And I distinctly remember that when my mom would make chicken spaghetti as comfort food if I had to get dental work done. And so I have fond associations with chicken spaghetti for my mom's taking the time to make it for me, but I do not have fond associations with it because of dental work because I am not a fan of the dentist. So there you go. Those are some of my favorite childhood meals. Definitely not fancy, but most kids don't like fancy food. So I guess that makes sense. I hope you enjoyed this week's, well, I should say this year, this last episode in the year's version of What Do You Want to Know Wednesday? Your questions answered, big and small. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of 2024, that you have a restful Christmas season, that it is filled with joy, that it is filled with a focus on the incredible gift that came to this earth in the form of a tiny baby who grew up to sacrifice himself as a gift for many on the cross for our sins. What we could not do, he did for us. And that is truly, as cliche as it can sound, the reason for the season. And I am so grateful ultimately for the gift of God's love and the sacrifice of his son for me. And I pray that if you do not know that love and that sacrifice yet, that you would come to know Jesus as your Lord and Savior. You can always ask me questions at Abbie@msformama.net. I am happy to share with you the reason for the hope that I have in Christ. And I am so grateful that you are here. If you enjoy the M is for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.